ICT4D webinar. Sorry for the short delay, but we're ready to go now. Thank you very much for attending. This is just a couple of housekeeping rules that we're starting with, and then we will introduce the speakers. So, yeah, first of all, if you haven't logged into the audio, you have to do this manually. And we will also keep everybody muted during the session. So you please do put your questions or any comments in the comment box in the chat room. And this is our webinar on digital innovations for humanitarian response. And this is part of a conference, ICT4D conference webinar series that is facilitated by CRS together with NetHope. It's a monthly event. And for this session, we're looking at humanitarian response, and we have speakers from the Norwegian Refugee Council, Motorola Solutions, and the World Food Programme, in particular the Emergency Telecommunications cluster. And just a couple of housekeeping points. We like to keep the session interactive, so please do post your questions during the sessions. We will first have a couple of short presentations and then a general Q&A session. So during each of the sessions, please let us know your questions. You can either do this anonymously by sending them directly to myself or Frederick Vincent's. Actually, it's Seth under his name. And if we don't get through all of the questions, we aim to pass them on to the speaker afterwards and aim to answer them afterwards and share them after this event. We're also going to record this session, so you're able to access it later and have a short summary as well. So I will follow up email on through the NetHope Solutions Center. And finally, I'd like to mention that we also have a webinar satisfaction poll that we like you to fill out. It's a very brief survey just after the webinar session. Actually, I'm already going to the next slides because we had a few changes in terms of our speaker overview. You might have seen when you signed up that we initially also had a representative from the International Rescue Committee, but unfortunately Daniel Coughlin was called into a emerging meeting, so he's unable to join us. And also the representative from the World Food Programme has changed, but we have a fantastic expertise for you in this webinar. And it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. So as I said, this webinar will look at digital innovations for humanitarian response. And we will start with the short presentations and then have time for discussion and questions. My name is Sonja Rützel. I'm the ICT4D Conference Manager in the Global Knowledge and Information Management team of Catholic Relief Services, and we're putting together this monthly webinar series. I also have a couple of notes I like to mention afterwards about the conference, in particular since all these speakers will also be present at our conference in Lusaka in May. But now let's first focus on this webinar and our expertise in the room. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our first speaker, Mr. Pierre-Guillaume Wieliczynski he's the Deputy CIO and Deputy Director of IT of the World Food Programme. And, where are these slides? There we go. I think we're in this one. Here we go. Pierre, I will pass on the control to you. So I think you should be able to change your slides now. And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Sonja, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody on the line. a pleasure for me to be with you. Initially, my boss, Enrica, was supposed to join, but she's been called into an important meeting. So I am afraid that you are stuck with me. I'm hoping I'll do justice to the slides that I'm about to show you. I have about 5 minutes, 5 to 8 minutes, and then I look forward to presentation from the other panelists and a Q&A session. So the topic of digital innovation for humanitarian response is a pretty broad one, and again, 5 to 8 minutes might not be enough to cover everything that's happening at the World Food Program, but nevertheless, I want to take you through some of the high points. Before I go into what we're doing here at WFP, just for those that do not know the World Food Program, we're part of the United Nations. We're a humanitarian agency who, as the name indicates, focuses on food security. We're global. We operate in about 80 countries, and if we are very active on disaster response and emergency management, we also operate in, let's say, steady-state countries tackling malnutrition issues. So just to give you a sense of the scale of our operation, as I mentioned, we're in 80 plus countries. We assist about 80 million people year in, year out. And we're pretty good at humanitarian logistics, at communications. At any point in time, there would be about 5,000 trucks going and carrying some of our food. We'll have 20 ships at sea and about 70 planes up in the air. We're about a workforce of 15,000 people, distributed really globally, with 90% of our colleagues doing some of their life-saving work in the field. And increasingly, a lot of our staff two-thirds of our staff is operating in conflict areas. We've been doing this for over 50 years now, and technology and digital, broadly defined, is taking a more and more important role in our ability to conduct our job. And sorry, I think I skipped a slide here. No, sorry, there's the SDG slide. That really shows what we have, what really is focusing a lot of the work that we do today is SDG number 2, which aims at reaching zero hunger by 2030, and SDG 17, which is a broad goal to facilitate partnership with government, with private sector, with civil society to meet the objective. And WFP has really at its core some value to deliver on both of these two goals. I know that today we're talking about innovation, and WFP is we're not really scared of innovation. We do a lot of innovation, but what's important, at least in the functions where I am and in information technology, we very much look at innovation as part of business as usual. So we don't necessarily have in the IT division a dedicated innovation function, but really we look at innovation as pervading our core function, be it information management, be it communication and telecommunication services, network design, network engineering, and be it data. Innovation is something that is very much part of the day-to-day. WFP as an organization has invested in an innovation accelerator that is really a small outfit dedicated to exploring really far-fetched ideas and incubate them and accelerate them. But when it comes to the core of the organization and the bringing solutions to scale, we very much see innovation as everyone's job. And so, like I said, there's quite a lot that we're doing, but I wanted to draw your attention on the 3 or 4 relevant examples of innovation at work. The first one that you see on the slide here is the Emergency Telecommunications Cluster, the ETC, which, for those who are not familiar with the concept of cluster, these are services that are mandated by the UN, and WFP is the lead in 2 of these services. The first one is the logistics cluster, where the humanitarian system expects WFP to put logistic services when responding to emergency. And the second one is emergency telecommunications cluster, where, again, in a sudden onset disaster, the humanitarian community will turn to WFP for the provision, will turn to the ETC for the provision of communication services, voice, internet connectivity, help desk, computers, everything that touches on the ability for somebody to connect and share information is usually provided by the emergency telecommunications cluster. And we've been doing this for quite some time now, obviously in very close collaboration with a number of partners, NetHope being a key partner of us, but also private sector companies such as Ericsson Response and governments such as the government of Luxembourg. And what we do is that we really work together to make sure that the solution we deliver on the ground to the first responders keep up with the way things are changing. So, maybe 10 years ago, a lot of the focus was on providing people with radio, telecommunications, and handset. I think obviously now the expectation is to have reliable data services. And so on the photo that you see here on the screen, on the left, you see a big balloon with SES on it, which is one of our partners. And we've been innovating with the private sector, with the government, on how to set up rapid communication facilities such as this balloon. So innovation is very much something that we do at the telecommunications level, but we're also keeping up with how things are evolving. So the communications, the cluster, which was doing a lot of that connectivity work, finds itself now needing to provide solution and innovate on the spot to give more services to the affected population. And I can point to a recent example in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, where the colleagues from the cluster very rapidly developed a mobile application that has been given to the beneficiaries and the people affected there to gather their feedback and answer their questions and really understand how best to calibrate our services to meet their needs. So this is, to me, is the type of applied innovation that is born out of necessity, facing a need in the field, and can rapidly be delivered in a particular context, such as Cox's Bazar, but done in such a way that we can start then scaling it up to the rest of our operation. While we're on the topic of relationship with the people we serve, one of the critical innovation that is really consuming a lot of our attention in the World Food Program is the shift, if you will, that the introduction of cash has created in emergency response and humanitarian operations more generally. We have now a one-on-one relationship with a lot of our beneficiaries. I think right now, this you see on the screen, it says 26 million. I think we just crossed 27, where our beneficiaries now have a name, have a face, have a voice, and have the ability to receive from us tailored assistance. And that, to me, is really probably one of the most significant innovation that the humanitarian sector is facing, which is really that shift from helping indiscriminate masses of people to really having the granularity that technology allows you to have with the people you serve. So here again, I think a very strong example of how the humanitarian sector is evolving and embracing technology that really fundamentally forces us to operate differently. So that's another key point of innovation. A third example, which is not as mature as our work on one-on-one relationship with beneficiaries, but one that is showing a lot of promises, are our work on UAVs, aka drones, paired up with artificial intelligence. So we have a team of very creative responders who very early on realized the potential for drones as obviously a delivery mechanism, but also as a way for us to obtain more operational information to better size our operation, to understand where we need to respond. And so we've now deployed UAVs in two emergencies, the most recent one being Dominica, and the two ones being Dominica and the Bangladesh crisis. And we've been really getting our feet wet with some promising results, deploying drones for recognizing terrain, for better understanding a particular situation, road closures, etc. And we're pairing that up with artificial intelligence, where the footage or the photos that are obtained for the drones is rapidly processed and analyzed for all kinds of different use. So this is something that we're doing, not quite at the scale where it needs to be, but we're hopeful that it's going to get there relatively rapidly. But we're putting a fair amount of effort behind the UAV, the technology powering UAVs. our 5-year plan really is to how do we get really on top of the game when it comes to remote sensing by pairing up the drones and machine learning and artificial intelligence. We're still looking at how can we use drone to do payload delivery. I think we're looking at mostly small, less than 100 kilos delivery for parts or maybe small portions of food. I mean, this is something that is developing now. We're keeping a close eye on that. The second one is blockchain, and I think you might have seen a few headlines about the work that we've been doing on blockchain. The colleague that you see here on the photo holding the green card is a colleague of ours, Human, who has been a very good thinker about the potential of blockchain when applied to humanitarian context. And I think we're one of the few humanitarian agencies that has developed a real blockchain project that is live, that is really empowering our ability to give aid to some of the people we help in Jordan. Just a short story on blockchain is we're right now using it as a very discrete component of the financial architecture in a cash context, where we did a first proof of concept with 10,000 Syrian refugees in a camp, where they were basically redeeming their vouchers or their card, and the transaction was in real time logged into blockchain and architected in such a way that if other agencies want to join the architecture, it's very easy for them to do that. And it's been very successful, both in terms of the scalability and the application of the technology, but also we went very quickly from 10,000 refugees to 100,000. We crossed that milestone last month. So, I don't want to be the one, believing the hype and being overly excited about any of these technologies. I think WFP always keeps focus on the beneficiary, focus on the impact we're having as the first criteria for a particular technology. But we're cautiously optimistic that the technologies like blockchain and AI and UAVs in and of themselves bring some benefit, but it's really going to be the combination of all these technology in a new way of operating that is really going to be the real transformation that the humanitarian sector will gradually undergo. Really, I think the one slide that the last two slides I think that I wanted to present. The first one that you see here is the whole industry is moving from an economy of transaction, where really the way we were operating is giving aid to the people that needed it, to an economy of relationship where the people we serve have a voice, are part of the equation, and are very quickly becoming an important actor in making sure that the assistance they get is useful, is tailored, is action, and it has the impact it needs to have. So this economy of relationship introduces a slew of technology. And it's, to me, my mantra is that before we look at technology, let's really understand what's before us. Let's understand network dynamics. Let's understand platform economies, and then gradually adjust the way we operate, and then only then really deploy technology to meet that objective. So we're making some good headway on this, and I'm always optimistic that there's more and better that we can do. And it's starting to this is my final slide. It's starting to have a little bit more of senior management attention, where we're looking at really digital as not the indiscriminate deployment of technology, but really look at what is the promise of digital in our relationship with government? What is the promise of digital to simplify the way we work internally, to automate a lot of our processes? What is the promise of digital in how we work with sister organization in the United Nations system and in the global NGO and civil society? What is the promise of digital in galvanizing interest from the public at large? So a lot of these conversations are moving beyond just technology shop and are starting to be looked at as truly business transformation. And again, I'm very optimistic that this is something that will be very impactful for the most vulnerable today. And the WFP certainly looks forward to playing its part in being a catalyst and sharing our lessons and really interacting with all of you to understand what works and what doesn't work. That's it for me. I missed a little bit of the introduction. I'm not sure if you want to take questions now. or later, but I'm here for the remainder. So thanks for the time and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, PG. Thank you very much for the insightful overview of digital innovations used by WFP. So what we like to do is have the presentations first and then take the questions. That is also a good cue for everyone to not be shy and to place your questions in the chat box. Or send them directly to me as a private message. Then I can also post them for you if you want to stay incognito. Yeah, feel free to direct the questions directly to the speakers, or if you have any general questions, those are welcome as well. I've also noticed that I was so eager to start earlier that I forgot to introduce the whole panel in one go. So I will introduce them, yeah, as they come and give their presentations. So can I just have the presenter ball back? I don't think I can grab that myself. It's just the little icon next to your name. Okay. Okay, oh, this works too as well. So it's my pleasure to introduce the next speaker. Travis, you have the presenter ball, so you can go to your next slide. That's just a thank you from WFP. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Travis Hennefeld. Travis is the Director of United Nations and International Accounts at Motorola Solutions, who have been a long-term actor in the humanitarian space and obviously a lot of insights to share. So Travis, I'll pass this on to you now.
Yep, should be good. Hi, everyone.
And yeah, we're good to go. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today, and I'm very happy to be part of this panel and to follow on from PG's WFP presentation. I think there's lots of segues and connections and bridges in the way of moving forward, and it's nice to see commonalities there. I mean, the first thing I think I want to point out is from a partnership perspective. I mean, I know that was part of what we wanted to cover here. I mean, Motorola's one of the private sector players in the ETC and has been for a long time. So, I mean, this is one of the ways that we can work together to identify the promise of digital. I'm not going to take that much time. I probably can do this in 4 or 5 minutes. But what I wanted to do today for all of you is just give you the angle from Motorola about where we're just how we're looking at things from an emergency response perspective. So I think to start out, what we're talking about now really is we've moved from a device communication I would say provider to a delivering mission critical platforms. Okay, and these are the digital platforms that we can talk about. I mean, the biggest sort of, I would say, installed base in the emergency response community is the analog VHF radios, and now we've passed the tipping point on the digital radios, and it's thinking about using that and keeping that inside of delivery solutions and building other platforms, which I'm going to show you a couple others, what it can be around the data services, it can be around other parts of the delivery. So, but the piece we're really interested in from a platform perspective is the mission critical, the secure communication, where we're looking at using this for security reasons, for efficiency reasons, or even for the context, the terrain, et cetera. So these are the mission critical platforms. Now, what are the trends we see, and I've chosen 3 here that I think are applicable to the emergency response, disaster response environment. I mean, and some of this was shown in the WFP presentation. I mean, technology is the pace of adoption and the pace of technology advancement is so fast, but also broad that it doesn't really make sense to pick one piece of the puzzle or one brick or 2 bricks and say we're going to ride these. What it's about is leveraging and building on the convergence of all of these advancements and that are, and will continue to change. So this can be radios, like I said, it can be broadband, it can be social media, it can be cloud, it can be analytics, AI. So these are all things that are happening. So what we're really working on in the real world now is making the different, I would say, the different networks that are converged to be able to use the work group communications and the types of I would say structured ways to deliver and leverage the digital core, so that it doesn't matter if you have 5 people with radios, you have 10 people with tablets, and you have 500 people with smartphones or anything else. I mean, the list can go on, and it's about using this workgroup communication platform to do what needs to be done and get the job done and the operations at hand. So that's one thing. The second trend is we saw in the first presentation as well, is about how do you make data more actionable. Now the slide I'm showing you here is coming from a safer city solution that the Motorola would use in a urban area. Where you're turning, noise into data, data into intelligence, and intelligence into safety. But now, when we turn to the humanitarian response environment, it's about using the video analytics, using social media, using public and private data sources to really get in and make decisions. And this leads us to a second platform that we're using and building now, which is called Converged Security Information Management, and it's about linking all of the sources of feeds of information you have, and using it in a structured manner to deal with actions that you want to do, to manage your buildings. Sensors are obviously a key one. We mentioned earlier, security management, access control, and it's about powering the real-time situational awareness. That's the second thing. And the third trend I wanted to just throw out for the discussion is about moving from I would say, having devices at hand to really manage service, okay? So, and this is where, if you look at all of our customers, from emergency response to international accounts to cities, government, states, they're moving more and more on the mission critical platform level to a managed service model, which can have different advantages and customizable, flexible models. So in the end, what we're looking at, and this is where we see things, is not only having a situation room, but having a managed network of networks, right, where you could have as many disparate but converged public and private networks that your operations are going to start, leveraging and using in a contextual basis. So, I mean, that's I would say my last slide is what does this mean for our humanitarian operations and emergency response? It means, I mentioned network of networks. It means thinking about the role of a secure mobility platform that you would have in your operations, about having structured and effective work group communications, and then building and expanding on the situational room capabilities. So I leave it at that. Hopefully, I gave you guys some reasons for questions or just thought-provoking things, and looking forward to further partnership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Travis. Thank you for the insightful overview, and also, for leaving it short so we have some time for questions. I can now see a lot of questions coming in. Please do keep them coming. There's a chance we might not get through all of them, but we'll pass them on to the speakers and aim to respond in a post-webinar email. Now our next speaker is, actually I need to get the presenter ball back, please. And in the meantime, I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker. It's Michael Rowe. He is the Global Advisor for the Shelter and Settlement for the Norwegian Refugee Norwegian Refugee Council, and I know, and therefore also our representatives for an INGO in this diverse speaker panel. So I'm just moving on to your presentation now. So
thank you very much.
Okay.
Before I kind of get into this, I'm going to try to be as quick as possible, but I just kind of want to highlight that this is a project that's currently in process, and we're in exploration phase and research and development phase. So we don't actually have a product on the ground, but it's presenting some of the questions we're grappling with as we look at this particular solution.
Would you like me to fast forward, or do you would like the presenter?
I think I have. Do I have? No, I don't have a presenter.
I send it to you now.
All right.
Okay, here we go.
All right, so now I have a presenter. All right. So what we're looking at is what we're entitling from provider to facilitator. I've got to switch from here. So just quick context, NRC has been operational in Lebanon and Jordan since, with our sheltering programming since 2013, 2012, responding to the displacement of approximately 1.6 million refugees. We're dealing with protracted urban displacement, a challenging legal environment, varying degrees of formal work opportunities, poor families living in substandard buildings, and lack of security of tenure. NRC's programs there have been working on the completion of partly finished buildings in exchange for occupancy free of charge. The programming increases the number of housing units in the market, and at the same time offers the rent-free accommodation for a period of 1 year. The program has been largely successful despite challenges along the way. We also have similar programming in Iraq and Greece. From a shelter perspective, we still consistently lack the capacity to directly assist more than a small percentage of those affected by the crisis. The demand for housing exceeds the ability for us to utilize the current modalities of linking beneficiaries to property owners and vice versa. The existing mechanisms that we're utilizing to carry out this programming do not necessarily operate at the scale of the need and are overly reliant on organizational staffing capacity and funding from traditional donors. This means for the majority of displaced populations, they're forced to find shelter solutions themselves, increasingly in urbanized areas where pre-existing housing stock is the most common type of accommodation. When engaging in this, many displaced families rely on informal mechanisms and familial connections to identify properties. This becomes more difficult, risky, and costly the further away from the area of origin one is. Property owners are at times hesitant to rent to displaced persons due to lack of guarantees, security deposits, and insurance. There's also a reluctance to rent to potentially mobile populations, which reduces the number of properties people are able to choose from. There's also issues with lack of consistency and transparency during regard to tenancy agreements, with clear roles and responsibilities, which results in disputes and conflicts between tenants and landlords. There's not necessarily a consistent mechanism of complaints, grievances, and conflict resolution between owners, tenants, and communities. There's also the increasing pressure to move towards unconditional cash distributions. However, these fail to address adequacy and protection issues when cash is utilized to secure accommodations. That's just a brief overview. I'm going to skip here and then go back. So the main question is, can we scale shelter assistance through digital platforms, enabling us to reach more people in need? So right now, NRC is working on a project that's entitled The Safe Night's Rest. So we're looking at the digital humanitarian real estate platform for people in need of shelter, facilitating their ability to connect with property owners interested in hosting and renting existing housing stock. And one of the key things we're looking at is how do we go about managing risks and relationships between property owners and communities while maintaining the adequacy of the housing condition and the security of tenure. So, sorry, I'm looking at two different presentations at once. My notes are elsewhere. So when we're looking at this, we're trying to understand what the role of the facilitator may look like in humanitarian shelter assistance. There are private sector models out there, such as Airbnb, Uber, Yelp, that do not directly provide the product, but facilitate a connection between different user groups. So when we start looking at the larger shelter provision, can we step back and become a facilitator of connections as opposed to a direct provider? Which means we need to kind of look at what the role of the facilitator is. In many private sector platforms, the facilitator provides a platform for verification of the condition of the place you're renting, for example, on Airbnb. It provides means of reputation validation. It provides mechanisms for complaints if you have an issue with a property owner. Provides an insurance scheme to basically create an environment in which people are willing to open up their homes to people that they do not know. So as we're exploring this, we're trying to understand basically how does this work within the humanitarian sector? Is there a place for us to play in engaging in that facilitator type of role? Can we still maintain adequacy, dignity, safety, and security while doing that? Another question we're exploring is, if we're doing this, at what scale does a platform need to operate to be able to function as intended? A lot of the private sector mechanisms for things such as Airbnb rely on crowdsourcing of information or crowdsourcing of verification. So user ratings require a certain number of people to engage with the platform before they take on validity. How do we do that within the humanitarian sector, and how many people do we need to bring on to actually have that be a valid source of information? And also in terms of pulling in those different types of user groups, what kind of features does a platform need? If it only serves the interests of the beneficiaries, which we're definitely trying to, like, that is our target group, but we also have to serve the interests of the property owners. There has to be a mechanism to draw them in to utilize the platform as well, otherwise it does not function. We could stay within our current groups of people that we work with the existing property owners that we've engaged with, and the existing beneficiaries and new beneficiaries, but that doesn't increase the scale. So how do we pull people into a new platform, and what kind of feature sets do we need to incorporate to be able to actually address a multiplicity of needs and desires? One of the things, we've had focus group discussions. We've had over 50 focus group discussions with potential users of such a platform in Greece, Lebanon, and Jordan. And one of the things that came out quite frequently was that trust is a critical factor in people being willing to engage or consider engaging in such a mechanism. So how do we scale the trust that some of these individuals have with NRC and bring them onto a digital platform? Many people, again, were basically indicating that they had never used such a solution before, even though there are some private market solutions within the countries that we were discussing the issues with, but that they didn't trust them. There was There was concerns of fraud. There was concerns of a variety of different things. What the response that came back in the discussions, well, if a reputable organization or somebody we knew and trusted operated the platform, we'd be more likely to use it. Let's see. So I'm going to skip to the next slide. Another issue that's kind of come out within these conversations is that when talking to people, when having these focus group discussions in some countries, there was a large number of potential users that had smart devices, to an extent that surprised me. However, the usage of those smartphones or smart devices beyond basic communication was relatively limited. Therefore, the question really becomes, like, they're not using applications beyond this small model right now, but there's the chance that they might. Do we start to develop a platform now for potential future users? Some places the potential users are not quite there with using a variety of applications. It's fairly limited, but that does not mean that they won't be there in the near future. But how we have to understand that the rate of adoption might be relatively slow, and as we engage in this project, that we might not have high usage levels initially, that it might take a while to actually get the user base that we need. And for this drives questions of how do we have longer term investment in such a product that might not have a larger user base for quite some time. Is it still something that we as an organization can invest in? There's also a good chance that it will fail. A substantial portion of apps in the private sector fail. And do we as NRC have an appetite to risk failure over a long period of time? Let's see. Where did I go? Sorry, I'm losing track of myself. And I'm kind of running low on time, so I'm just going to kind of skip around a little bit. One of the questions, again, is user adoption, retention, and engagement. How do we get people to engage with an application for the first time? Do we make it connected to the type of assistance? How do we draw people in to use that application to begin with? In the private sector, a lot of apps drop off quite quickly. They'll have a large adoption initially, and then usage falls off quite rapidly. How do we kind of design a platform that has enough functionality to engage users after that initial test? If I use it just to search a little bit, what other features can I use to be able to, that continue to add value past that initial engagement? Can we create digital pull factors? How do we pull people into this and then keep them engaged? Things like user ratings require consistent engagement. I need contributions constantly to validate those issues. And I'm sure I'm running low on time. And then another thing we've been thinking about is, what does a sustainable business model look like to be able to run and operate a platform like this? How do we step beyond maybe more traditional humanitarian funding mechanisms and look at other ways that we may address funding? Whether we kind of engage in alternative business models that are maybe more geared towards a private sector approach. Do we have mixed revenue streams? Do we look at institutional donors? User fees, not necessarily for beneficiaries, but maybe for property owners? Or do we provide other services that generate some revenue in order to drive the scaling up, drive iteration, increase the functionality of the platform? And going forward, I mean, again, we're still in the relatively early stages of development and exploration. There's a lot more questions that we have than we have answered. And so the next several months, we're going to continue to kind of dig in there. We're going to, based upon the discussions we've had with a large number of potential users, we're going to develop an actual roadmap for what the platform would look like and how we should go about mapping in different feature sets. Which ones should we prioritize in order to drive early engagement? Which ones are more important, might have more significance longer term, but don't necessarily need to be there day one. We're going to end up developing an alpha version of the platform that we can then beta test and get feedback on the UXI and functionality. And then we're going to continue to engage with external actors because, I mean, this is something that is quite possibly beyond the capacity of NRC to develop internally. So who do we partner with? How do we partner with them? Yeah, and how do we continue to drive this forward? I think I'll end it there.
Thank you very much, Michael. One of the comments were if you considered partnerships with Airbnb, and
yes.
The other, yeah, excellent,
so,
like a good partner.
So I will say a little bit about that. This is not entirely unique. There are things out there. Airbnb does have a service. One of the things we're exploring is the model they have is a little bit different when it comes to providing housing solutions for my understanding anyway, for refugees, where an agency actually places a household within a housing unit that somebody has volunteered. It's generally shorter term. They're also exploring other things. I've had conversations with them, but not in the last couple of months. Whereas we would be looking at basically opening up that direct line of communication between beneficiaries and landlords, where we don't necessarily act as an intermediary of that relationship. We might facilitate it, but you don't have to come to us and then we connect you to a property owner. You can connect to the property owner yourself. We just provide the tool and the platform for doing that. And it might be that Airbnb will move in a direction where there's not an agency intermediary between the refugee and the host, at least in that initial linking up phase. But again, they may have, when the last time I talked to them, they were at a 10% solution, so it might be that they're further along in development and are more along the lines of what I'm talking about now.
Thank you very much. Oh, am I mute? Okay, I think that works now. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Sonia.
Okay,
yep.
Sorry, I got some problems here with my mute button. Oh, good. So in light of time, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask to the general speaker panel. So there were a number of questions going in sort of the direction of which kind of digital competencies a charity or NGO should have developed in order to guide innovation. So, how to develop those innovations, or is there any specific technical profiles needed? I was wondering if maybe PG, if you have any comment on this from your side, and then I will ask Travis afterwards as well.
Sure. Happy to jump on this because I think it's probably one of the most important point of doing innovation is not necessarily having good technologists. I think if you have a lot of smart data people or some great developers, they will come with the idea, an interesting idea. But I think the key thing for innovation, that if you want to bring it at scale, the first thing is a very deep understanding of the user. And I think there was a question about human-centered design, which is just a means to an end. It's a very important means. And I think being able to genuinely understand what value you could add to a beneficiary's life or a refugee is a very important skill. And not so much seeing how your program fits their life, but really understanding their life in abstract of any program, and then figure out where you can add value to this. So that's one. The second competency, I think, that is very, very important, and that is a critical success factor in terms of scaling up any innovation, aside from having management being committed to it, is you need to have an appetite for changing the way you work. So I've seen a number of times where an innovation looks very promising, but when you try to bring it into the core of the organization, the processes are not aligned, the systems don't talk to each other, there's a culture of it's not my initiative. So there's a lot of non-technical critical success factor to scaling up innovation that I would encourage everybody to take a hard look at before you go down the road of developing what you think is going to be a killer app or something like this. So, almost surprisingly, the technology is probably the last thing that you really want to focus on, but it's really about being clear on the value that you can provide and having the internal dynamics very well lined up so that the innovation is supported throughout the organization. Over.
Thank you very much. And Travis, do you have anything to add, particularly looking at sort of human-centered design and sort of beneficiary-centered design, particularly looking at representing the private sector here?
Yeah, I think of two things. One is about skill set, because I agree on the technology comment, but it's about having sort of like cross technology or, like two or more tech or I would say even engineering or real life operator user of two worlds. So that can be, it can be Wi-Fi, it can be video, it can be radio, it can be, but anyway, having two or more of those as a combined skill sets, I think that's helpful. And then the second comment is, and more with our humanitarian and other customers, it's about there's a role of and I think it's sort of what PG is saying. There's a role for what we call a business analyst, and somebody who actually walks through the flow of the real life user or the scenario or the situation, and then we use that so that you can get from having data and points of information and really have actionable and real-time situational ability to do things. On the design thinking, I'm actually a judge at the Biomimicry Institute for the annual competition they have, which is using nature's guidelines to come up with innovation. What I've gotten so far out of that experience is, understanding that, it's very, there's always this line between, fit for purpose solutions and then a more general or generic thing that, can cover lots of different cases. And so it's always, that's the trade-off, I would say. You might have a wearable barcode scanner that you can put on the finger of a forklift operator, but then that's only good for the forklift operator, but that could be the right innovation to have. So you have to balance the two sides.
Thank you very much. And the other sort of, I guess, key point, there were two more, I would say, sort of key topics that came up in the chat room. One is around blockchain, and I feel that we don't have enough time to have any meaningful contribution around this. So what I would like to ask is that we put this into the post-webinar document, and I also like to refer to our January webinar we had, particularly on blockchain, with UNCDF and a few other speakers. So there's also a recording of this, but we will also answer those, forward those questions. And the other big theme was around privacy, so particularly as an ethical approach to data collection and use. Then we had a number of different questions around that, given that obviously humanitarian response is very time sensitive. And the question is always a trade-off, or there might be a trade-off between having very clear processes and also considering then the data privacy questions as well. Could I ask the speakers as well to give us some comments around maybe sort of some final comments around the privacy concerns? Can I maybe ask, start with Michael for your sort of comments around this?
Want me to start? For me, this is what I mean about the role of a mission-critical platform, right? So, mission-critical platform, it's, as I said, it's for efficiency and for security. Really, those are the two drivers. So you might say, you know, for these services or for these applications, we want to have it on a more secure platform, as opposed to you know, I don't know, social media feeds that are public anyway, that are going over a less mission critical you know, network. And that's what. And then when I say you're managing a network of networks, it's because you've got, you know, different cases, different needs. Some are mission critical, some are less mission critical, and it's about finding the right balance and you know, having all the trade-offs in there, whether it's cost, whether it's accessibility, connectivity, et cetera, that come into play. Over.
Thank you. And PG, may I ask you also for some comments on how you and your team approaching the topic of data privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you can imagine, the you know, with great power come great responsibilities, and this is something that is indeed, as Michael was saying, is mission critical. And I think I saw a few questions about whether the database is centralized or not. It is centralized. I mean, this is something that we take very seriously, that is hosted in a data center that is benefiting from some of the most, you know, state-of-the-art cybersecurity measures that you can think of. And I'll spare you a little bit of detail, but WFP is really treating this as one of the most critical assets of the organization, and as such, it really benefits from all the technology and all the processes that we can put together to make sure that that data is safe. Aside from the safety of the application or the network on the cybersecurity, there is a lot of training that is going into making sure that, one, the data is properly collected, the data is collected with the informed consent of the beneficiary, that there is the right processes to cleanse and anonymize where appropriate the data. You know, we're doing a lot of work on this. Will it ever be enough? I don't know. But I think that if I look at where we are coming from as an organization, which, you know, I mean, the gory reality of the life on the ground is that you will still have some offices, and I think WFP is probably ahead on this, where you still have data being collected in an Excel file and being sent by email. So the level of maturity in the organization about privacy is not something that you do as an afterthought, but privacy is really by design, right from upstream, from the collection to the storage to the usage of the data, is something that is of paramount importance to us. I think there was a question just on that with regards to blockchain. Sure, I mean, in our particular use case that I posted an article in the comment box, how we're using blockchain, the privacy implications are very, very limited or quasi non-existent, because we're using blockchain in a refugee camp context in Jordan, and the identities and the access is completely managed by our sister agency, UNHCR. So essentially, UNHCR that tells us whether that beneficiary is in their system, yes or no, and if yes, we process the transaction and record an anonymous number. There's no personal identifiable information stored on the blockchain. But I think in terms of some of the challenges that digital transformation brings into agencies like ours, privacy, both from a system standpoint, but also from a cultural standpoint, is one of the most challenging areas. So we are bringing on board a number of experts. We're bringing a privacy officer. We're doing everything we can to make sure that this is not jeopardized, because trust is key in the way we operate, and we'll do everything we can to preserve it. Over.
Thank you very much. We're already at the end of the hour, but I'd like to very much thank PG, Travis, and Michael for your contributions, and just highlight again that I think PG, I think it's your colleague Enrica joining us for the conference in May, but Travis and Michael will be present. So if anyone in this group is looking to join us for Lusaka, you can also meet the speakers there. Just like to highlight that, the conference will take place on the 8th till 10th of May. And we have just finalized our call for speakers. and we'll share more information about the speaker panel and the topics to be discussed very shortly. Also, humanitarian response will be a big topic at the conference. We have a conference track dedicated to this, so I'm hoping to see a lot of these attendees at our event. Otherwise, yeah, it's my pleasure to work with you on this webinar series. Thank you very much for NetHope for facilitating that with us. And yeah, big thank you to our speakers, big thank you to the attendees, also for your questions. We will forward these questions to the speakers and work with them on a post-webinar document. I know we didn't get to go through all of them, and share some more insights and links to further information. Before, I like to ask you to fill out the post-webinar survey. I also like to mention that we will have our next webinar in 1 month on the 20th of March. We will be looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning tools and applications for development and humanitarian response. Our speakers include Patrick Meyer, he's the founder of V-Robotics, and Pablo Suarez from the Red Cross Federation. And I think you will be in very good hands hearing about those solutions. More information will be on the website shortly. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And please, when you drop off, fill out our short questionnaire. And I hope to see you again next month. So big thank you for everyone to joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Sonia.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Day.